Started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the City of Des Moines Zoning Board of Adjustment. This is the first time in a year and I think 4 months that we've had this meeting in person. When we did virtual meetings, our process was exactly the same, but I want to thank our city staff for helping our board and all of the public through that process. But it is good to be back here in person in our city hall. So to give everybody a little background on how our process works, this may be the first time you're here. You may hope it's the only time you'll have to be here. But we'll guide everybody through the process here today. First, I'll give some explanation here, but again, we'll help you through the hearing. This board has the power under Iowa law and the zoning ordinance of the City of Des Moines to hear and make decisions on requests for variances and exceptions from the regulations in the zoning ordinance, to review conditional use permit requests, and to hear appeals from any decision of city staff in the administration of the zoning ordinance. The members of this board are citizens of the City of Des Moines and have been appointed to the board by the City Council. The board members are volunteers and receive no compensation for their public service. I'm going to take a minute here to introduce our board members. We do have 7 members of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. We have 1 member who is absent today. We will have another member who will be joining us here probably in about 20 minutes or so. I'll go ahead and introduce our members present. On the audience's right is Justin Gross. Next to him is our newest board member, Rhonda Cedillo. And Rhonda is a Des Moines native from South Side. She lives on the northeast side now and was recently appointed by the City Council to fill our board spot vacancy for Ward 2, which was recently vacated by Lynn Carlson, who had served with us for about 5 years, and Lynn moved out of state. So we want to welcome Rhonda to the board. Other members here on the audience's left, just to my right, is Marlis Jones. Next to her is Cindy Smith. And joining us shortly will be Nathan Blake. I'm Mel Pins, the board chair. I'll introduce our city staff who will be assisting us today. Legal counsel for the Board of Adjustment here on my left is Judy Parks Cruz. Our city staff that will be presenting items and assisting with questions. Frank Dunyoung, senior city planner. Just raise your hand. There's Frank. We have Catherine Drehas, city planner. Bert Drost, our Deputy Planning Administrator, Eric Lundy, the Zoning Enforcement Officer, Jason Van Essen, Planning Administrator, Sue-Ann Donovan, Deputy Director of Neighborhood Services, and Tyler Hall, our meeting moderator. So I'll go over our meeting's procedure here. First of all, the Board of Adjustment is a quasi-legal board. So this is a legal hearing. It will be conducted within the procedures and format as authorized by Iowa law and this city's ordinances. This meeting is open to the public. The meeting is being recorded by both audio and video for a legal record of these proceedings. The board members have each received a copy of the agenda and the staff recommendations. If you want to get a copy of the agenda and staff recommendations, if you haven't, I believe they're right outside the door here in the little letter tray. The board members have each received a copy of that agenda. The board is required to base its decision on each item upon the criteria established by law for the type of relief sought by the applicant. The law applicable to each case has been identified in the written staff report. If the facts, as determined by this board, demonstrates that the criteria established by law for granting the relief has been satisfied, then the board must grant the relief. Otherwise, the board must deny the requested relief. Each item will be announced in the order that it appears on the agenda. Items listed on the first portion of our agenda, called the consent portion of the agenda, are not planned to be individually discussed. They will be considered for approval in accordance with the recommendation in the staff report, unless the appellant does not agree with the conditions recommended by staff, or if there's an individual present here today at the hearing, or a board member that requests that the item be removed from the consent agenda so that a full discussion on the matter can occur. And I will come back to that consent agenda here in just a few minutes. So again, we'll help you through each step. For our regular portion of the agenda, After the agenda item has been announced, city staff will first give a brief overview of that appeal, and they will present any written comments that have been received prior to the hearing. Then the appellant or their representative will be allowed up to 10 minutes to present their appeal. We will then move to the public comment portion of the hearing on that item. Anyone wanting to speak in support of, opposition to, or in neutrality of that appeal will be allowed up to 5 minutes each to address the board. Once all concerned citizens have been spoken, the board will then ask any additional questions of city staff. Lastly, the applicant will be given 3 minutes for a rebuttal or other closing comments. If you have comments you'd like to add on a specific agenda item, all speakers are requested to speak from the podium, which basically is our microphone stand here to your right. Begin your presentation by first giving both your complete name and address of business or residence as appropriate. In the event you may need to be contacted for legal notices related to the outcome of this appeal. All speakers are requested to remain courteous and to focus their comments only upon those facts that demonstrate whether or not the criteria established by law has been satisfied. Speakers are asked to ensure that they're respectful of time considerations, and if necessary, the board chair will limit further comments by a speaker if they exceed their time limitations. The board chair will then close any further public comment on the agenda item at hand, and the board will immediately deliberate the request, and we will make a decision here today on that appeal. Please note that it will take at least 4 affirmative votes for any zoning appeal to gain approval. If your appeal is approved today, we ask that you wait until at least 1 week from today's hearing if you would need to contact the city's Permit and Development Center for any necessary building or sign permits related to your appeal. This gives an opportunity for the decision of this board to be documented in the form of a decision and order, and that decision and order will be provided to you as well as city staff. Any appeal that is approved by this board must be implemented, constructed, or otherwise utilized within 2 years of the date of the decision by this board, or such approval shall expire. The decisions of this board can only be appealed in the Iowa District Court. If you believe you've been harmed by an error made by this board, your only remedy is to seek relief through the court within 30 days of the filing of the board's decision and order. If you believe the zoning regulations applied by this board are wrong, you may petition the City Council to change those regulations for future considerations. Finally, all material written or otherwise used or presented today as part of anyone's presentation or comments is considered part of the permanent record. So if you haven't already provided us with a copy of that, you'll need to contact city staff after the hearing if you need a copy of anything presented, but you'll have to leave a copy of any documents, photos, plans, etc. with staff. A few housekeeping items. We ask that you avoid any undue conversation in the audience so as to limit distractions during the hearing that is in progress. Please ensure that your cell phone has been silenced. So far, everybody's doing a great job. And if you need to use a restroom, feel free at any time during the hearing. Just walk through these doors all the way almost to the other end of the atrium here. Just before the elevators on the left, there are 2 restrooms available. Once the agenda item you're interested in has been completed, you're welcome to leave the hearing, or you can stick around and listen to the rest of our agenda for today. We'll have a 5-minute break in the hearing around 3 or 3:30 if that would be necessary. So those are our comments on how our procedure works. But again, for all of you and those that may have just stepped in here, we will guide you through the process. So don't worry. We'll make sure that everybody knows when they have an opportunity to speak and what item we're dealing with at hand. So related to that, so Bert, do we have any changes in our agenda?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Bert Drost, planning staff for the City of Des Moines. We do not have any changes to the consent portion of the agenda. There are 16 items on that portion of the agenda. There may or may not be some members of the public here to speak in opposition. So if they are, they'll have the chance to raise their hand when you read through those. But item number 17, which is on the discussion portion of the agenda, staff would like to move that to the consent portion of the agenda. We've recommended approval There are no objections from any neighboring property owners, so we do feel number 17 would be worthy of being moved to consent. It would take a motion and a vote by the board to move it to the consent agenda.
Okay, so first and foremost on that, I will check with our audience members. Item number 17 is a zoning exception request at 111 East Grand related to the installation of a wall-mounted sign. Is there anybody present in the audience that would be opposed to the Board of Adjustment granting the requested exemption for the sign? If there's anybody that would be opposed to us granting approval for item 17, just please raise your hand for the moment. All right, seeing none. Board members, unless anybody has any questions or concern about item 17, would there be a motion to move that to the consent agenda? All right, so motion by Marlis. Would there be a second from a board member? All right, a second by Cindy. So we'll go ahead and take a vote on that. And board members, just as a reminder for us, this will be a little different than when we were doing this through home. I'll say all those in favor. All you have to do is raise your hand and say aye, and then I'll do all those opposed, and as applicable, raise your hand and say opposed. We got a motion and a second to grant a exception for item 17. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. All right, those opposed, none. All right, so that motion carries 5-0.
Just a point of clarification, there's a motion to move it to the consent.
That's right. So motion to move that to consent agenda. So item 17 goes to consent. All right, so now I'm going to go back through the consent agenda for the audience's benefit here. So we have a number of items on the consent agenda. A few of the items might be kind of similar in their request. And Bert, there's nothing else you need to add on that? Okay. No. All right. So I'm going to read through these. If anybody has any concern that they would not be in favor of the board granting approval of the requested either conditional use, exception, variance, what have you, when I list the item, just raise your hand for the moment if you would be opposed to us granting that. And then we would hear that item directly and take testimony. Then more than likely, if you were opposed to it, you'd probably want to give some comments. So I'll read through these here. So item 1 is a conditional use request at 200 Army Post Road. Is there anybody here in opposition to us granting a conditional use permit request for the premises at 200 Army Post Road? It would be for a tenant bay for what would appear to be a convenience store, but would have limited sales of wine and beer. Anybody opposed to granting a conditional use for item 1? Just raise your hand. All right, seeing none. Item 2 is a conditional use related to Verizon Wireless in the vicinity of 2806 Bowdoin Street. Anybody in opposition to item 2? Just raise your hand if you are. All right, seeing none. And just like an auctioneer, in case I miss a hand, if anybody sees a hand go up I missed, let me know. Item 3, a conditional use request also by Verizon, vicinity of 1519 Pennsylvania Avenue. Anybody in opposition there? Item 4, conditional use permit, Verizon Wireless, vicinity of 713 East Sheridan Street. Any opposition there? Just raise your hand. Seeing none. Item 5 is a conditional use, also Verizon, vicinity of 2332 Amherst Street. Any opposition if we were to grant approval there? Just raise your right hand if you'd be in opposition. Okay. Item 6, conditional use, also with Verizon, vicinity of 2915 North Union Street. All right, we've got somebody in opposition for item number 6, so we may need to, so we'll go ahead and move that to our regular agenda. Item 7 is a conditional use request also by Verizon, the vicinity of 700 East Ovid Avenue. Anybody here in the audience in opposition to us granting approval for item 7? Seeing none. Item 8 then, also a related conditional use request, the vicinity of 3400 Amherst Street. Any opposition there? Okay, seeing none. Item 9, also a similar conditional use request by Verizon at 705 East Euclid Avenue. Anyone in opposition to item 9? All right, item 10, also a conditional use permit request for Verizon Wireless near 1344 East 9th Street. That's item 10. Item 11, a conditional use permit request the vicinity of 4047 Cottage Grove Avenue. Anybody in opposition there? Okay. Item 12 is a conditional use permit request for Verizon near 3931 Waveland Drive. Any concerns there? All right, seeing none, we're getting there. Item 13 is a conditional use permit request related to Verizon Wireless at 3806 Washington Avenue. Anyone concerned about that one? Okay. Item 14 is a conditional use permit request near 1709 East 8th Street. That's item 14. Any concerns? All right. Item 15, related conditional use permit request at 814 Alpha Avenue. Anyone here in opposition to item 15? All right, seeing none. A different request for item 16. It's a conditional use request to allow a weekly artisan market in certain weeks or seasons of the year at 4118 University Avenue. That's item 16. Is there anybody here in opposition to the conditional use request for a seasonal weekly artisan market? All right, seeing none, that's item 16. So then what we would have for our consent agenda would be items 1 through 5, and if I'm correct, then items 7 through 16 and item 17. Is that correct, Judy, Bert?
Yes.
Okay, so unless the board has any further discussion, would there be a motion to grant the requested conditional uses and appeals and approvals for items 1 through 5, 7 through 16, and item 17, subject to staff recommendations? All right, so moved by Justin. Would there be a second? All right, second by Marlis. So all those in favor of granting the requested relief for these items, raise your right hand or whatever hand and say aye. All right, that motion carries 5-0. So if you were here for items 1 through 5, 7 through 16, or 17, those have been approved. In about a week, you'll get a copy of the formal decision and order with those approvals. So we thank you for coming in today. All right. And Rhonda, whenever you feel comfortable, feel free to weigh in with a motion. Good, good. Okay, so then in order of appearance, since we had one item that was on consent that we moved to the regular portion of the hearing, we will first hear item 6. It's a conditional use request by Cellco Partnership doing business as Verizon Wireless in the vicinity of 2915 North Union Street. And we'll first have city staff give a brief overview of the requested appeal.
Sure. Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Bert Drost again with the planning staff for the city of Des Moines. Item number 6 is a request for a conditional use approval for a small wireless facility. The property would be located in the right-of-way near the corner of North Union and Hall Avenue. The subject property is really located along the east side of North Union Street, just to the south of Hall Avenue. Here's a photo of that right-of-way where the small wireless facility would be located. Here are the documents provided by Verizon that show where the pole would be located and how it would appear. So you could see that they would be affixing it to this existing utility pole. And if you look closely, right here below the light, they would put the small wireless telecommunications facility there. So it would be located at least 10 to 15 feet above grade. Verizon can probably give that dimension if the board's interested. Here are just some more images that the applicant has provided. You can see it would generally be located near the corner of the driveway. Staff has recommended approval. In your packet today is the criteria that the board is legally obligated to base its decision on. There are 9 criteria that they must satisfy, and staff does believe that they have satisfied all of those criteria. We feel that the impacts of this facility will be minimal since it's being placed on an existing light pole and utility pole. So we have recommended approval of the conditional use. Here is the consent map. We did not receive any comment cards back in support or opposition. And then here's a summary of the neighborhood outreach. As part of the conditional use project or process, the applicant is required to mail notices to the adjoining property owners, and I do not believe here's the letter that they sent, and here's the list of property owners they had to send it to, and I do not believe they had received any feedback on this particular site. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. Did you have any questions for me? Sure.
Sorry, got to remember we got to put our mics on. You mentioned it's in the right of way, but this almost looks like it's a parcel. Did you just do that to show it a little more?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not a parcel of land, it is right
Yeah,
of way.
it would actually be located, if you can see the cursor on the screen,
Sure.
it would be within the public right-of-way right here. But for mapping purposes, we kind of
that's cool.
notify rather than under notify.
I get it. All right, excellent. Thank you. Any other questions for Bert? Justin?
Yeah, Bert, we've had some of these come before us before, and it's my understanding that it's very regulated by the state. Is that right? And that we're very limited in what we can do?
Yeah, there are state and federal laws that significantly limit the city's ability to regulate. On small wireless facilities like this, the city is only able to require conditional use approval if it's within a local historic district, which the city has 3 of those, and this is not in one of those, or if it's at a property that is zoned and used exclusively for single-family residential. So if it was like a duplex on this property or multifamily, they would not need a conditional use. But because it's a single-family house on this property and it's zoned N3A, which is a single-family district, then the conditional use is required.
Thank you, Bert.
Good question. Okay. All right. Any other questions for Bert? Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what the applicant has to say. So applicant or the representative of the applicant?
Yeah, and I was going to just mention the
Sure.
applicant can have to speak from that podium
Right.
and then tell me when to toggle between your slides, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, we'll need both your names, address, I think related to you all, be your place of business, and you've got up to 10 minutes. If you're kind of do this jointly, you've got 10 minutes. You can share it however you want. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Can you hear me?
You can take it off the stand.
I'm assuming the microphone stand's always a little short for you.
Probably, I'll try to speak loudly. Hopefully
Sure.
it gets through. My name is John Palmtag. I'm with the network outreach team for Verizon Wireless. I had to take my business card to remember my work address, and just long enough.
Right.
4002 South 149th Circle in Omaha, Nebraska. And the other member of the outreach team for Verizon here in Iowa is my colleague.
Yep. Hi, I'm Emily Malewski, and my place of business is 4002 South 149th Circle, Omaha, Nebraska 68137.
And we're also here with our legal counsel, Rob Hunter from Stinson LLP.
Okay.
So if it hasn't not already been done, I would ask the board to admit into the evidence, or at least into the record, the completed application as submitted by Verizon so far.
That's generally, yeah, that's part of the record, right, Judy?
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
So just getting started here, I think, as has been mentioned, and as city staff did a good job of explaining, this is a small wireless facility application for a Mid-American Energy co-location. So we're going to mount on an existing pole, or a replacement pole, on Union Street here in Des Moines. Not loud enough?
Uh-huh. Yeah, our audio-visual coordinator says,
Goes off.
Yeah, sorry.
And so if we go to the next slide for a second.
This is just a brief background and timeline of our process for applying for this site. And so we had initially submitted our application for the small wireless facility for 8/21, and then we had a application meeting with Mr. Bert Drost on June 8th, and we sent our neighborhood mailers to the appropriate parties on June 21st and submitted our application on June 30th. And city staff recommended approval on July 22nd, and then we submitted our neighborhood summary to Mr. Drost, and then we're here today to speak with you.
So this is just an overhead satellite image of the neighborhood, and as we've addressed the board previously last year when applying for small wireless facilities, especially with this newest technology, due to the laws of physics, we have to use shorter wavelength radio frequencies. I know when we typically think of radio frequencies for cell towers, we're thinking of miles of coverage in a very large radius. However, the technology needs, data demands of the current environment, as well as what we predict 5 and 10 years from now will require the use of these shorter frequencies. Unfortunately, due to the laws of physics, these frequencies travel a couple of blocks. They behave a lot like the light does, so our site acquisition teams, our RF engineers, have to be very cognizant of the surrounding area, buildings, even tree cover. So they work very hard to find the least intrusive mounting position for this equipment, while also getting the coverage area that we're trying to obtain. And this coverage area is north of Union Street, that's north and south along the boulevard. Next slide, please.
So this is a picture of the existing Mid-American Energy pole. So it's a utility pole with a light on it. It does have overhead power lines and a communication line on it. And as you can see from the drawings, our equipment will be mounted below that communication line. It's very sleek, small equipment that is very integrated. So the radios and the antennas are integrated into just that one piece of equipment. So it is very small, about the size of, a laptop computer, 3 panels that go around the pole. So very not obtrusive and blends into already the existing infrastructure on that pole. And we will go in and replace that pole with a stronger pole to ensure the structural integrity of the pole, to make sure it's strong enough to support our equipment.
And then in that process, we give the new pole back to Mid-American Energy. We try to avoid, at all costs, owning poles. We try to avoid putting new poles in the right-of-way whenever possible. We have a great partnership with Mid-American Energy. And fortunately, this pole is a candidate for co-location. And for an example of the type of radio equipment we're going to install, you can actually see it out this window. The 3 smaller units just below, this actually has our older 4G technology on top.
Oh yeah, that's
cool. Pointing out. And then just below it are the 3 5G radios. Those are underneath the light arm. And they're shrouded. There should be no exposed wires that are noticeable from the ground. There's no light, heat, smell, taste, anything else. It's very non-intrusive. And if you didn't notice it walking into the City Hall today, we think we try very hard to match the existing aesthetics.
And the new equipment is much smaller than, that equipment is our older equipment as well. So as we upgrade to the newer, faster equipment, it does become smaller. So. Next slide, please.
So this is a picture of the site drawings. It's included in the application packet. As you can see, we're installing inside the right-of-way, again, on a replacement Mid-American Energy pole. And there will be fiber and electrical handholds installed in the right-of-way, but I think you can see from the drawings, there's already a number of underground electrical lines in the right-of-way. So we're doing what we can to minimize congestion. We're already going inside of the right-of-way that has a lot of uses in it. Next slide, please.
So this goes into, just briefly, the CUP criteria. And Bert touched on that as part of his analysis, but the proposed geographical location and operation of the use or activity adequately safeguards the health, safety, and general welfare of persons residing or working in the area. And we operate all of our equipment within FCC regulations and to ensure the safety and keep it at the required heights away from people. It's very important to us that we do maintain those safety requirements.
And just to refresh the board's recollection, the safety requirements are set at the national level by the FCC. All of our practices, all of our equipment, all of our technology complies with FCC thresholds and maximum limits. The next CPA criteria will not impair an adequate supply of light and air to the surrounding property. We're not installing any new poles in the right-of-way. This is just, again, 20-inch by 5-inch by 7-inch, 3 radios installed approximately 18 feet high. So there's really no substantial impact to light or air to the surrounding property. Next slide, please.
So our use will not unduly increase the congestion in the streets or public danger of fire, safety, or flooding. We operate within the right-of-way, so we're not in the street. We're going on an existing pole pole that's already there, so we're not adding anything to the right-of-way. John did mention some fiber and electrical hand poles that will be added, but they're ground level, so it's not actually any additional furniture in the right-of-way. It's ground level and blends in with the ground. All of our equipment operates safely and with applicable electrical, fire safety, and building codes. Next slide, please.
The proposed use, this installation of small wireless facility will not impair established nearby property values. In this case, again, it's a very, very minimal installation of 3 small cell radios. It actually does increase the wireless capacity and technology for the neighborhood, which we believe is incredibly important. The studies that we've seen suggest that for, I think, 83% of millennial home buyers, wireless coverage is the first or second most critical decision or factor in their home buying process. And if there's any realtors on the board or realtors in the audience, if you've shown someone a house who's connected to their phone, texting their parents or spouses, I mean, if it's a dead spot, if that message does not go through, then they're probably not going to be putting that house too highly on their list of prospective purchases. Next slide, please.
So the proposed use is consistent with the general purpose of this zoning ordinance, the planning and design ordinance, chapter 135 of this code, and the comprehensive plan and specific purposes established in the zoning ordinance for the subject use. Our proposed small wireless facility is specifically allowed in N3A areas with the CUP approval process. Next slide, please.
The proposed use should not have no significant detrimental impacts to the use and enjoyment of neighboring properties. Again, this is on a replacement mid-am pole, not adding anything to the right-of-way. The use and enjoyment of neighboring properties should be significantly enhanced, at least for Verizon wireless customers, because they will have the absolute latest and greatest wireless technology that should future-proof their digital uses and applications for the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide, please.
So we want to thank you today for allowing us to speak with you about our proposed small wireless facility and bringing improved service to the Des Moines area.
And we're happy to answer any questions now or during the rebuttal period.
Well, you guys must have practiced this. You got a minute left, so good job. Yeah, do we have any questions for John or Emily from the board? Cindy?
Or would they need to install their own unit if they were to do so? I'm just kind of curious about that.
So in this case, that's completely up to Mid-American Energy.
Okay.
Are
But
you
they
talking
wouldn't
about?
share yours.
They wouldn't share our equipment. And so I think that's what you're talking about,
Yes.
the specific small cell. That's specific to, that's our equipment and operates on our frequencies and works with our infrastructure. But as John mentioned, Mid-American Energy could allow another carrier to co-locate their own equipment on the pole if there's enough room. I mean, this pole already has quite a bit of infrastructure on it, but other poles, that could be a possibility.
I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Good question. Other questions for the applicant?
It's true.
Justin?
I was wondering, you're going to be installing a new pole, is what you said. Is that going to be the same height as the previous pole?
In this case, it should.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Because in essence, the same existing wires, and it looks like there's some cable and telephone, that'll all go back, you know.
Same
probably just-
spot.
Yeah, match right up.
Right,
Okay.
and we're just ensuring the structural integrity
Right.
of the pole.
Yeah, yeah. Light poles have a certain life expectancy, so I'm assuming if you're going to put new equipment on it, you want to know they're going
We
to tear
take
it out.
into account the wind and
Right.
the weight load of the equipment on the pole, and, you know, our equipment's very expensive, and we don't want it falling down on
Okay.
anyone, or, you know, and so for the safety of the public as well.
Related to Justin's question, in looking at that pole, and as I try to look at the details on the height, it looks like your equipment would be about 18 and a half feet above grade. Is that correct, for height? So generally speaking, that's probably just above, let's say, a rooftop level, thereabouts.
So in this specific case, this is actually lower than what we like. And our RF team, radio frequency engineers, they love it. They love to put the radios as high as possible. So we try to go at 30, 35 feet on the existing use. In this case, I think this shows to what extent we were willing to try to co-locate on an existing American Energy asset. Just the difference between 18 feet and 30 feet can have pretty profound impacts on these relatively limited propagation characteristics. So we're already sacrificing probably a number of homes that we could otherwise reach by not going at 34 feet. But in this specific case, we were able to co-locate and avoid adding a new pole right away.
Okay. And, I'm somewhat familiar with, electrical transformers, kind of like those little cylindrical garbage cans that, sit up high on a post. Based on your design and what you've laid out, would you say compared to what, would be a transformer, are these smaller, larger, about the same size?
I'd say smaller to a transformer. And because these wrap around the pole, they're not hanging off, because I feel like a transformer kind of hangs off a little bit more. So these are more integrated within the pole, and one unit, it blends in a lot better.
Okay.
John, would you agree with?
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Okay.
So it's not sticking off to the side like you see most transformers.
Okay.
The radios, again, are 20 inches tall by 7 inches by 5 inches each. They're 31 pounds a piece. Just
Okay.
reading way too many instruction documents.
I wrote something down, you said like a laptop screen or something to that effect for size then?
For each of those 3 panels that wrap around the pole.
Okay, all right.
And I will say the transformers aren't color matched to the pole. So if we're on a galvanized steel pole, we would paint the equipment a silver color.
Okay.
I believe for this equipment it's brown. I think because it's a wood pole, or it might be gray. I think we've determined that gray blends in better with the aged wood
So
pole.
Mid-American Energy has a standard gray color for pole equipment that bolts onto wood poles, and we use their paint color code, whichever it is.
So a complementary color to whatever
Whatever that pole
structure
is.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, any other questions for the applicant? Okay, all right, thank you for your presentation. We'll check back with you in a few minutes.
All right, thank you.
Thank
You
very
bet.
much.
Okay, so the way the next portion of this agenda item works, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in support of the applicant's request? Anybody that wants to speak in support of granting approval for this? If so, you can step up. Seeing none, is there anybody that wishes to speak in opposition? That's next. Go ahead and come on up to the microphone. You take your time. We aren't in a hurry here today. Well, yeah. Wow, this is great. I like this. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Michelle Taylor Frazier, and my husband and I reside at 2920 North Union. So we're not right across from the right-of-way. We are the house on the corner of North Union and Hull Avenue. And I cannot say that I oppose this. I had questions about it.
We understand that. Yep.
And I'm sorry that the card was not returned. I had surgery on June 21st.
Sure.
So when I got to a place where I could look through the mail,
Yep.
I was like, well, I'll just come to the actual
Yeah.
thing and ask my questions. So
Okay.
my questions were, how was this location selected? And I'm a PhD level researcher, so I always just, when I have questions about things, I just want to find out more. So I can't say that we are opposed to it, but I do have concerns about anything that is emitting, radioactive waves, things like that. And so I did do some research, and I know that this is below the FCC regulations, but I wanted to know, have you had any reports of health problems? And the way the law reads from 1996, you cannot, as the city, consider health problems in whether you vote or not for it. But I think as someone that has lived there for a long time, almost 30 years, and my aunt's parents built the house in 1958, we just have a right to know if there are any health problems associated with it. because with transformers there have been. And the neighbor that the house that they were showing, she has suffered her whole entire ownership time from horrible headaches. And her bedroom is located right by that transformer. And I do know that this is a much smaller type of frequency, but they're still strong. They travel for 2 to 3 blocks, like you said. So I just would kind of like to have that information. And it would be easier to ask you here than to call or write letters and do all that. And then, let's see, I think that's pretty much all my questions.
Okay. Well, Michelle, what we can do here, at this point of the hearing, it's to take your statements. The appellant has an opportunity for a rebuttal at the end of the agenda, so if they'd like to address your questions then, they can do that. But I certainly think your observations and your questions, that's exactly what we have this hearing for. Sometimes for folks, when you get your card in the mail, you're not quite sure. There's all these zoning codes and the definitions are pretty basic on what they're asking. Sometimes it's good just to see and hear what's being proposed.
Yes, I appreciate that, and I don't have a lot of in-depth knowledge on it, but my father passed away a couple years ago. He was the first African American in the new Iowa Guard, and he designed the very first research facility at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And all of his work was based on using frequencies, so there was a lot of information about that. And it's changed a lot since 1968 after Vietnam. But growing up, I learned a lot of that information. So
Wow.
just want to make sure that we get all the information out there before everything happens. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. All right. Is there anybody else who would wish to speak? I'll just say either in opposition first or neutrality. Anybody else that wishes to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, if we have no other people that want to speak on this item. First, do we have zoning enforcement officer, since you're there? You have anything you'd like to add? Okay.
No, I think it was already addressed
Okay.
with regard to the federal act. So.
All right. And board members, any questions for city staff? All right. If we don't have any other questions for city staff, appellant, you've got up to 3 minutes for a rebuttal, closing remarks. If there's anything you've seen or heard you'd want to address, you are welcome to do so.
So thank you for the opportunity to provide a rebuttal. I think the question really boils down to 2 different factors. How do we select a site? I'll address that first. We have radio frequency engineers that look at a lot of maps all day long, figuring out where we need coverage. And in this case, we're trying to provide the absolute latest coverage to this neighborhood along the Union Street. Again, the propagation characteristics of the facilities are not all that significant. They don't travel all that far. So we have to be very particular about putting a whole lot of these in the right of way, hopefully on Mid-American energy poles, near our target coverage area. So we're trying very hard to provide our house with the latest wireless capability. As far as the health and safety concerns, I know we've addressed that the FCC has a giant panel of experts, scientists, medical professionals. They set health and safety standards. And our attorney, Robert Hunter, has a handout I think I'd have to provide to Brad.
This is just an industry handout. This is also just some additional information about our project.
And hopefully those can provide some answers to your questions about our health and safety. Again, we comply with all FCC regulations and requirements. Personally, I have a 5G phone that utilizes these radio frequencies. I'm not worried about it at all. Emily just got the brand new iPhone 12 that she utilizes these frequencies as well. And just to give you an idea of some of the speed benefits, I'm not sure if too many people think real hard about the internet speed that they get at home. I know mine for my Wi-Fi router is something like 200 megabytes per second. I was just outside of City Hall running a speed test on my phone about an hour ago, and I got the 1.7 gigabytes per second. So this is a generational leap in technology, and it all still complies with the FCC health and safety requirements. And I've seen what they've produced, I've seen our research, I'm not worried about it at all for me or my family. And I hope the members of the public are not as well. And just touching on the 5G health and safety, I know the term 5G is thrown around a lot in our advertisements. every participant in the telecommunications industry talks about 5G. There was a Russian misinformation campaign about 18 months ago on Facebook to try to discredit the technology and to slow the progress of the build-outs for U.S. telecommunication carriers. And Emily and I, at least in Iowa, try to fight some of that misinformation and provide the science and FCC-backed information to anyone with questions that we can.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. You're very welcome. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our public testimony. So we'll now close the public portion and go to board deliberation. So Rhonda, for your benefit, this is where as board members we can discuss what we've heard. Sometimes we may want to say what we think to our fellow board members before we have a motion for a vote one way or the other. But I always remind everybody that, again, the criteria we have to consider in our decision-making is what's laid out in our appropriate Iowa code and our city ordinances. Those primarily relate to general conditions in the neighborhood, congestion, light, property values, et cetera, all those 9 conditions listed. So does anybody have anything they'd want to start off with for conversation and discussion? Go ahead, Cindy.
Mr. Chair, I really appreciated hearing from the Verizon representatives and also from the neighbor who had some opposition, slight opposition to it, mostly questions about it. I think it's really important because not all of us are technologically minded. You probably are way more than I am. So it's good for me to listen to information on how these are set up. And I've been on this board for quite a few years, and I remember when we were having to decide on, are we going to put up a 80-foot to 100-foot tower with a big outbuilding and with chain link fence around it? That to me was a lot more heart-wrenching in terms of the neighborhood impact versus this new technology. So I personally am excited about this new technology, but I do understand your concerns and they're very valid. So thank you for presenting your concerns.
Well spoken. Anyone else? Okay. Anybody got a motion one way or the other they'd like to put out there?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move staff.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. So we've got a motion by Cindy, a second by Nathan for approval of the requested conditional use permit for this item. All right. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? I don't think we have any, but okay, so that motion carries 6-0. All right. Thank you all for coming in. Michelle, thank you for coming down today. If you're on the mend here, looks like you're doing pretty good, but we appreciate you coming down today for our process. All right, that'll bring us to our next item on our regular agenda. And that will bring us way down the line, I believe, to item number 18, if I'm correct.
That is correct.
And that is the Campus Theater Corporation and Des Moines Film Society at 1207 25th Street for consideration of some zoning exceptions, variances, and conditional uses. And basically, this is what I call the old varsity theater.
It is. And
All right.
I noticed that the applicant wasn't here today, so I have been emailing him. You see me standing there on my phone, that's what I was doing. And
Sure.
he said he couldn't be here, but he wanted to go ahead and proceed with the hearing anyway. So
Okay, that's fine.
we
They
won't have an
that.
applicant, so
Right.
this is unique.
Yep.
So number 18 is really 3 parts. One, like Mel said, this is the old varsity theater. They're renovating it and restoring it. It recently went to the Landmark Review Board and is in the process of being designated as a local landmark. But as part of the theater, they are wanting to have alcohol sales. So the first part is the conditional use permit or the conditional use approval for that. Then they're also wanting a series of signs, 5 wall signs totaling 117 square feet of area. So that's the second part. And then the third part is that they would like to have 2 of the signs, which I'll be showing you here shortly, be electronic reader board signs. And our zoning code only allows electronic signs if it's on a freestanding monument sign. So they need a variance of the provision that says you can't have an electronic reader board sign on the wall of a building. So the site, as we mentioned, is the Varsity Theater located on the east side of 25th Street, just to the north of University Avenue. It's across from Drake University's old main building. It's a 2 to 3 story building. There's a second floor mezzanine level up here. The sign package that's before you today would require this marquee sign to be removed, and then they would be adding a triangular sign in its place. Here's the floor plan that shows the theater as well as the balcony mezzanine level here at the west front end of the building. Then here are the elevations that they've proposed. This drawing here on the top right is really the best picture. You can see that they would have 2 signs on each side of the marquee. So they'd be triangular, so they'd come out at angles. And from this perspective here at the bottom right, you can see that there's a 2-sided projecting sign on the front of the building as well. So the 5 signs include this 2-sided vertical sign and then 2 signs on each side of that vertical sign. And the electronic component would be this white box here. Then there'd be 2 of these, 1 on each side, and they're asking for a variance that would allow that to be an electronic reader board so that they wouldn't have to have somebody stand out there and change the letters for the films that are going to be showing. When they went to the Landmark Review Board here within the last month, the body had no problems with them doing the electronic sign. They felt that that would still be in harmony with the historic character of the structure. So I just wanted to point that out, that the Landmark Review Board really did not have a problem with them using the electronic reader boards. Here are some more slides that they've submitted.
So the building wasn't originally even a theater.
That
That's
might
the
have
same
been
building, huh?
the building that predated them. Like I said, I wish they were
okay.
here to
Yeah. Okay.
go over these slides.
38.
I'm not doing them justice.
Sure. Some other ones in the
Yeah, some other
neighborhoods.
theaters.
Okay. So there we go. It was a new building when it was built. Or at least redesigned, it looks
Yeah,
like.
looks like it's 605 seats.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is like a side profile that shows how it slopes down.
So those are the original plans, per se,
Yeah.
for what the theater was designed at.
Here's a nice rendition. Again, where it says grand opening, that's what would be the electronic reader board.
Okay.
As far as the staff recommendation goes, we have recommended approval of the conditional use for alcohol sales. We feel this is an appropriate location for it. It meets the separation distance requirements for such. So we have recommended approval of that, subject to the standard conditions. The number of signs and the size of signs both require the type 2 zoning exceptions. You know, as this board well knows, exceptions are generally easier to get than variances. They just have to demonstrate a practical difficulty. So we have recommended approval of those type 2 zoning exceptions. However, that final appeal, which is the zoning variance for the electronic reader board signs, in order to grant the variance, they need to meet the test of a hardship, which says without the variance, there's no other economic use of the property, which it's a very hard standard to meet. So staff has recommended denial of that appeal. We feel if that was denied, they could still have a reader board sign there. It just would have to be static or with changeable letters and not electronic. So they couldn't change it from the comfort of their building. They would have to get out there and change the letters when they were changing shows. So I can leave the conditions up for the conditional use. It's just the standard conditions that this board is used to seeing about, just said any sale of alcoholic liquor, wine, or beer must be accessory to a theater assembly use within the existing building. They need the required permits and licenses from the clerk's office. They need to comply with the noise ordinance. Again, I won't read through the last, but there's standards. And we had recommended approval of the 3 Type 2s, just subject to issuance of all necessary sign permits from the Permit and Development Center. And then we have recommended denial of that variance. Here's the consent map. We did get a card in support, 2 cards in support from the properties on the block to the south. I believe this one's the Jimmy John's building. Yeah. Yes, thank you. And here's the last card. Again, this man owns the Jimmy John's building. Again, the applicant. Then this was the letter that they had sent to the neighboring property owners as part of the required neighborhood outreach. So any questions for me?
All right. I guess I would just have a procedural question since we don't have anybody to present.
Right.
So if we have questions of you, we're not making you be the presenter.
Right.
But I think, at least for me, a few of the questions I might have for you would be ones I would ask the presenter. So as long as you're okay with maybe
Sure.
pinch hitting
I can
here.
try. Right.
Yeah, not to necessarily be an advocate per se for the applicant,
Yeah.
but just with some fundamental questions on what's being presented here.
Yeah.
So, okay, just with that in mind, then, board members, any questions for Bert? Because we're not going to have anybody presenting on behalf of the applicant. Are there any questions you'd have about this project, just generally speaking? Cindy?
City staff's denying, I think
Is it green?
it's green.
Okay,
I never
you're good.
turned it off. I just kept it on.
Okay.
So city staff is denying the variance of having electronic board. So that would mean somebody would have to go out with a ladder
Right.
and climb up there
In the winter.
in the winter. That to me seems like they do have a practical difficulty.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that.
Yeah.
Thank
Bert, can you pull up a photo of kind of what the marquee looks like now? Just how
Yeah.
it's sitting there now? Okay. So they have a marquee now that in essence could be lighted on one, at least the main front or maybe even the sides. Is that correct?
Yeah, on all 3 sides.
And while it's not the final marquee, they'd like to kind of restore it and have that more
Triangular.
typical triangular. But in essence, while they would be backlit, there is some lighted signage on the building now that could be used, or was used, at least.
I believe since it's been out of operation
Yeah.
for 6 months, they've probably
Right.
lost.
Okay. But it was used
It was.
as a light-up
Many
sign
years.
on the front, kind of historically since the theater had operated. They had a lighted big front sign, but again, it was backlit. It wasn't considered electronic. Right? Okay. Now, electronic signage in the city ordinance, I don't have it memorized, but I'm assuming electronic signage means things that are LED, LCD, OLED pixels, they light up from the inside and make small image a larger image, correct?
Right.
But there's nothing that says an electronic sign means it moves or has motion, even though some can. You're just saying how it's lit, how they're proposing it, means it's an electronic sign. How
Or
they're
if the message can be changed, if it's not a static message. So
Okay, and if it can be changed, is there a time frame of change in the ordinance, or just, nope, it could be changed at the flick of a switch? It could be an hour, it could be every
yeah,
6
the
hours,
flick of a switch.
but that's considered electronic
so-
signage.
If an electronic sign was allowed, it would be required to only change its message every 8 seconds. It
Yeah.
couldn't show message.
And I'd have a
moving.
problem with that. But yeah, I'm just trying to kind of compress this into what does an electronic sign truly mean?
Right.
And therein, what are to the best of your knowledge, what are the relevant concerns with the existence of an electronic sign? Let's say it doesn't change but once every hour.
Right.
Or
the
let's
board-
say it
the
never
board can make that a
changes
condition.
unless they want to update it.
Right.
That would still be an electronic sign, right?
Right.
And therefore, regardless if even if it doesn't change for a week at a time, you'd still consider it electronic
Right.
because of the type of lighting and how it's controlled.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm following you there. Okay. And we've had lots of proposals for motion and waves and
Right.
flashing, and I get all that.
Yeah.
But if it's just backlit, then it's not electronic.
If it's just, yeah,
Like fluorescent
Like
bulbs.
like what's being shown on the screen
right, that
now.
would not be electronic.
That's not
Okay.
electronic.
Is that
It'd be a
is that
reader board
allowed?
sign. That would be allowed.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So kind of, Rhonda, sometimes we got to think through these things with questions and, ask staff. So you got a question?
What they're looking for. What's wrong with having the electronic on the inside to change it? I know as opposed to how often
Right.
it changes on the, I get that,
Yeah.
but the convenience.
Yeah,
in
I know.
nowadays, 20, I mean,
Right. Unfortunately, our code is pretty black and
Yeah.
white. Like, I
And
wish
the
we had-
variance test is strong as
Yeah.
well. Nathan gives a good stump speech on that, which I enjoy. He's smiling. Right?
I am smiling under here.
He's smiling,
I
right?
mean, yeah, we're not in the board deliberation part, but I mean, to meet a variance test, you have to show not only that it fits the essential character of the locality of the land in question, which I think the other board sounds like they've kind of addressed that at some level, although we would have our own independent, evaluation of that. And also that you'd have to show that, it's due to the unique circumstances of the land there. But the core thing that people have a hard time showing, and frankly, I think it's almost impossible in any sign situation to show this, but that is that the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return from any use permitted by the regulations of the district. And to show that, you have to, a failure to yield a reasonable return may only be shown by proof that the owner has been deprived all beneficial or productive use of the land in question, not just that it's been depreciated by the regulations or that by granting the variance, they could have a more profitable use. So, I mean, that's the challenge.
Yeah, and Bert, to turn that into a slight question, that is basically what the city's approach is of why you're recommending
That's
the
the only
denial.
reason why we're
Correct?
recommending denial,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we
Yeah,
find it
yeah.
attractive and
Yeah.
practical, but just
Yeah,
isn't
so that's a very
necessarily meet-
important.
We couldn't find. I mean,
thing
the
to
board
know.
could still find it meets these, but as staff, we couldn't.
Sure,
find
sure, yeah.
it did.
So a related question here, Bert. Now, there have been times when electronic, signs or reader boards are allowed in districts. And even when they are allowed, sometimes staff has recommended conditions, or we've recommended conditions where, like I think with Des Moines Public Schools, we had a few where, hey, it's got to be dimmed to a certain something candle power, or maybe the message can't change more than X seconds.
Right. It's
You've
always-
seen where there's been conditions that have been placed on some of that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and usually when those conditions are recommended, it's because it's directly across from residential, like the
Right,
churches
right. We
will
wanna
typically
control
have
lighting.
that where
Right.
there are houses next door or across the street. But in this case, as I
Yeah.
mentioned, it's across from Drake's Old Main, so there really wouldn't be any
True.
negative impacts to the surrounding residential uses.
And again, also not to have, form of discussion yet, we're still asking you questions, but, there's still enough square footage of their lighting if this was allowed by us and they did crank it up. Sometimes when I walk down the street in certain neighborhoods, I think there's lightning in the background and there's not.
Right.
It's that electronic billboard
Right.
that's changing every 8 seconds, and there's small lighting flashes. So there could be the possibility, even without a residential setting, that a very bright electronic reader board could potentially put out some disruption. Would that be
Yeah,
something that's possible that could occur?
yeah.
Okay. And not necessarily with their proposal, because, but I've seen that before with some others. Yes. I've stood across in the Roosevelt Shopping Center in the summer one night. I actually thought there was a minor lightning in the distance. I'm like, oh, it was just an electronic billboard changing every 8 seconds.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to say whose place it's on top of, but yeah, it's in the neighborhood. Okay.
I've got another question.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead. Any other
I don't think this is included in the packet, but the the reference is to section 134-5.7 to talk about electronic signs, but they're not actually prohibited. They're just, they're only allowed on monument signs. Is that right? And so if they wanted to have an electronic sign, they could. It would just need to be on a monument sign, and they
don't have any
they
space
can't
for
have
it.
any space for
Exactly.
it. But
No, you're exactly right.
it is allowed.
That's an interesting point of note, yes. And is there the reason that within the ordinance, and again, to the best of your knowledge, how it was developed, why, okay, it'd be okay in a monument, but why not on the building? Too much projection?
You remember, Eric? I personally don't remember why.
Yeah. And I know it's slightly anecdotal, you don't have to, sign in blood on it, but, was there a reason why in this district an electronic sign on a monument sign would be allowed, but not on a facade? Because that's what it comes down to, right?
Right.
Okay.
You could use this podium, Eric.
Cool.
Eric Lundy, zoning enforcement officer. One thing I should point out is just in this latest round, the council did take the opportunity to modify the criteria for a number of the signs. One sign they didn't mess with was the electronic display signs. So there wasn't an urgency on their part to sort of accommodate a new technology or something like that. So I think they're very clear on their message about how they've legislated with regard to electronic signs. I think a lot of that is to protect their themselves with regard to the billboards that you mentioned.
Yep.
In
I
those
gotcha.
cases where we have to defend ourselves in that instance. So we have to be very careful about
Okay.
how we do treat them. And so by putting them on a monument base, it's very clear that it's the same mechanism
Yep.
that
Yep.
you would use for any other type of signage for that business. So
Okay.
I think
understand
that's
that.
really the basis of it.
Okay.
And that the putting them on the wall detracts from the architecture of the building, I think, too, probably. with
Sure.
some
Sure.
element
For,
of it.
for a general description, it might.
Yeah, in this case, though, you have the marquee, so
Right.
maybe that was it,
Yeah.
kind of the design intention of the marquee,
Yeah.
the message.
Yeah.
So
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eric. Any other questions for Bert or any other questions about the project? Hit your button there for, just so the record picks you up.
Yeah, so it would be these two signs here. They would each be 26.5 square feet, so a total of 53 square feet of electronic reader board.
Okay.
And down here in this appeal, you can see this is really verbatim what the code says. It says electronic or multi-vision display can only be located on the monument sign with no more than 24 square feet utilized electronic or multi-vision display, or on a general advertising sign, which is the billboard. So even if it were a monument sign, they would still be limited to 24 square feet on each side. So what they're proposing on this marquee is essentially 26.5 square feet on each side.
So
The marquee.
2.5 feet more on each side, 5 square feet more on each side.
Total, right.
Plus, we have the varsity sign vertical with some other exception level. But-
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, but the size of what they're proposing on the bump out that potentially they're requesting electronic, it's about 5 square feet larger than what would be allowed,
Right.
if it was a backlit sign. Right?
If it was a freestanding.
Freestanding,
Yeah.
or freestanding sign. Okay. All right, do we have any other questions for Bert? From anybody? Okay, all right, Bert, we'll give you a break here for a second. Is there anything else you want to put up there or
I'm
show?
just going to leave the
Okay,
drawings
all
up
right,
here.
thank you. So what I'll do in the transition here, so the applicant, I don't believe is here, but is there anybody who wishes to speak in support of the applicant, either a sign contractor, anybody from the neighborhood, or the theater association? Anybody wants to speak in support? Okay, seeing none, is there anybody that wants to speak in opposition to this item from the audience? Anybody speak in neutrality, just general comments related to the item? Okay, seeing none, I don't think we have any further questions for staff. Anybody? And there is no appellant to rebut. So we'll go ahead and close the public portion now and go to our deliberation. So Any general thoughts, ideas, concerns? Anybody want to start?
Well, I personally am very excited about this venue. It was my old stomping grounds for years, and when they closed, I was really sad. And I think the owners are trying to do a really good job of kind of bringing back the pizzazz, kind of give it a New York Broadway sort of showing. And, I believe they have a couple hardships. Number one, they don't have any space for a monument sign. Obviously, there's a sidewalk out front. There's not a lot of space in the area, as most people know if they've been in the area. And it also, to have them out physically changing that sign seems ridiculous to me. I think I would go along with the electronic signs, possibly make them smaller, not as wide, to be more fitting with the current sign sizes. But those are just my thoughts. I love the look. I love the idea. I think it's going to really bring this asset back for the whole city, for the whole community, not just Des Moines. A lot of outliers.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah. Great point.
I have the complete exact thought.
A complete exact.
I do. She's like reading my mind completely on agreeing to make them a little bit smaller and having it electronically to bring up, to make it a nicer. I mean, it still looks very good. So I was thinking the same exact thing if we could actually just make them a little bit smaller.
Now, something to keep in mind, depending on where we would go, if that would be a motion down the line, we have to give a fair amount of context to what we want to do. So do we want to say they have to stay within the signage allowance, so they couldn't have the 5 extra square feet of the exception? I don't think, unless we're doing quid pro quo here, if you wanted to let them have the electronic sign, then maybe you'd say, well, I want you to make it a lot smaller than what you'd normally be allowed to do with a backlit sign. So it kind of gets into, if we want to play a card, we have to say what parameters we want to that. Because staff won't say, well, I would then suggest that you make it 15 feet. It'll have to be, if you say you want it smaller, under what parameters, what's the reasoning, and then do we have the ability to apply that? And Judy, just conversationally, sometimes if somebody wants something they're not allowed, then maybe we can say, well, if you want that in order to preserve the general intent of the ordinance, we're going to ask you for something else. So in other words, you want to make the garage a little taller than it's allowed, sometimes we'll say, well, then the siding has to match the main house. Otherwise, you can build a garage and it doesn't have to match, generally speaking.
Right.
So with that, just to kind of give Rhonda a little context for this.
Yes.
Is that helpful?
That has been done.
Yeah. So yeah, anything else you want to add to what Cindy was saying there?
No.
Cool.
So, yeah, so, I mean, you heard probably an inkling of where I'm going to go earlier when I was describing the variance test, but I don't think they've met it. I am grateful that the city council has adjusted the code to allow for more flexibility and easily kind of achieved flexibility with signs. I think that's pretty reasonable. I personally don't have any problem. I think it looks great with the electronic sign, but we're not policymakers. We are here to apply the law, and I don't think they've met the test. The city council, in its infinite wisdom, has been pretty restrictive on these types of signs. So if it were up to me, although I'll allow for other people can chime in, so I'm not going to make a motion yet. But if it were up to me, I think staff recommendation makes sense.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm
Preston.
also excited about this project. But like Nathan has pointed out, it's not meeting the variance test. And along with that, the city council did have a chance to modify this particular portion of signage regulations, and they didn't touch it. So I think their intent is well taken. I also think in terms of reverting back to the historical context, it almost seems like the reader board is actually more historically appropriate. I mean, it's been that way for many, many years, and you see signs that have misspellings, or I mean, it just
The letters kind of fall off.
yeah. I mean, I'm not saying they should do that, but I guess my point is that if they're going for more of the bringing it back to the heyday, I think it just, for me, it's aesthetically pleasing to kind of see the reader board. So that's kind of where my opinion is right now. Thank you.
Oh, that's a good point. So to add a little flavor to this, Rhonda, the variance test is always a tough one. When I look at this, when I see the intent of the variance test, we are meeting a huge, huge, huge majority of this, because a lot of the key ones that I think the community has the concern about, what would be seen, what the impression it would give, the character would be, does it alter the essential character of the locality of the land in question? No, it's a movie theater. People expect to see a lit sign of some type on it. Number two, is it related specifically to the land in question and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood? Well, it is related to the land in question. It's a theater. It has a marquee on it. It has historically been there. Now, the lighting might have been a little different, but generally, yeah, it's not unique circumstances of the owner's own making. It was a theater. It is a theater. They can't put a monument sign there. So the architecture of the building says, this is where my signs go. Have they been deprived of all beneficial or productive use of the land in question? Well, then it don't work for a theater. What are we going to do with it? A little hard to tear a building down and put a new one in there when you've got two buildings next to it that they don't own that would limit how they can redevelop their property, just generally speaking. It might be a very difficult thing to do. You've got a building tied into a commercial frontage in a neighborhood district. To me, it would be very difficult to just say, well, start over and do something else. Sometimes that accommodation of adaptive reuse is more challenging than people think. So I think that there are some issues related to the land in question, including the attachment, proximity, and design of the neighboring businesses and this structure that would make it difficult to just pop something else in there. But that said, I just don't want to see a big old electronic sign blurting out with bright white lights here. I would probably be inclined to say, if we would want to do this, or a majority wanted to do it, that we need to have them fine-tune what an electronic sign would do. Maybe it doesn't have the bright white lighting as the background. It has to be the darker color. It has to be your background. Your letters are a lighter color. The lighting is reduced in its candle power or wattage, or however the city does it. There's a term for that. We've asked the Des Moines schools to do that repeatedly. And you know what? If it's to put your marquee up there, grand opening or now showing, I don't like the legal ones that get a change every 8.1 plus seconds. I hate those. I'd love to see it where, hey, you know what? Your message can't change but once every 60 seconds or something, or even greater, if I was to look at approving it. I'd like to find a way that the electronic board could be reduced to the scale of the property, and not to take what Justin's intent was and malign it from what he was saying, but I'd like it to then be more of what it was intended to be, which was now showing, versus, hey, this is a changing commercial every 30 seconds. I don't think I'd want to see that myself. So those are some other thoughts. So there's a number of ways to approach this. We could see if there's a motion on the table. It doesn't have to be to approve. It could be a motion to approve parts and deny others. If that motion fails, then we could look at some other motions. And Judy, help us out here. Could the board look at maybe breaking down some of this and saying, well, let's look at the general conditional use to allow for the sale of alcohol? We haven't even touched on that, but we know we have a lot of theaters in Des Moines that have done that. Flicks Brew House, Fleur Cinema, they're well-regarded places. Would the board, and again, it could be from one of the members, would the board want to look at making some motions to, in essence, kind of deal with some business that might be a little easier to decide, per se?
Yes. In fact, I would encourage that. It's often complicated when we have multiple and very different requests all coming in one application to have a comprehensive motion made that can be well discussed. So if there are particular components, here we have a conditional use permit, we have exceptions, plural, and then we have a variance, it might be easiest for you to accomplish your business if you chunk those out, take each of them discreetly, and reach a resolution on each of them so that the ones that take more time or discussion will be more focused.
So just by flow here in the staff recommendation, in essence, the first item, based on certainly their appeals, is approval of a requested conditional use for other use with sales of alcohol, liquor, wine, and beer for on-premise consumption. And so basically, that first conditional use is about selling alcohol there and complementary to the theater operation with, it looks like, 8 conditions that would go with that. I think those are pretty clear, what's been proposed, what the conditions would be. If there's some discussion on that, great. But if there's not, would somebody want to make a motion to perhaps look at approval of that conditional use?
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to move staff recommendation for the conditional use involving the sale of alcohol, liquor, wine, beer.
Okay. And I'm assuming, Justin, and this is also just kind of for procedural, because you believe that conditional use would meet the general intent of the ordinance and not be detrimental to the general welfare and.
And subject to the conditions laid out.
Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay, would there be a second? Okay, all right. Second by Marlis. So we'll go ahead and take a vote on granting the conditional use related to the sales of alcohol, liquor, wine, and beer for on-premise consumption at this location. All those in favor of granting the conditional use permit, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. And opposed would be none. All right, so that motion carries 6-0 on that part. So the second part, depending how the board wants to whittle this down, I might suggest, first of all, we have 2 exceptions just relating to the amount of square footage of signage. So we could just potentially look at the square footage of signage and decide, would we agree with the exception request? Do we want something different than that, or do we not agree with it? So subject to anybody else's thoughts, should that be the next one we explore? Just the exception level for the number and the general size of the signs. Anybody have any? This is board deliberation now, obviously.
Yeah, I guess I'd prefer, I mean, it sounds like we still have some differences of opinion about the variance itself on the board, but I haven't heard anything about any of the exceptions, so I would move approval of all 3 type 2 zoning exception requests.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because it's just about the size of the signage, whether it's painted or it could be backlit. That's just about that part of the sign, the size. Okay, any other thoughts? Nathan's got a motion for approval on that. What do you say, Rhonda? You want to say, yeah, I'll second that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Just want to get her in the mix here. All right, so we got a motion by Nathan and a second by Rhonda to approve the exceptions related to the number and square footage of the signs as proposed. All those in favor of granting those exceptions, raise your hand, say aye. Okay, so that carries 5-0. So,
Is that 5-0 or 6?
or 6-0, I'm sorry. Yeah. And one of those exceptions, we had the number and area, but there is a related exception related to the vertical clearance for the projecting sign. So Nathan, was your intent to approve that as well? And Rhonda, was your intent on the second?
Yes.
The same. And board members, we voted to approve that unless there was any other intent in your approvals. If so, state as such. Otherwise, all 3 of those exceptions are approved. Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
Very good.
So this brings us, I think, really, as probably we could have all guessed, getting it down to the one variance they've requested, and that is they want a variance to allow that these placement and size of signs, they wanted to allow for electronic signing. So now it comes down to, we can look at a number of approaches. We could look at a motion to support staff recommendation and deny the variance. We could start with that. We could look at a motion to look at granting a variance and giving reasoning and conditions therein. What would the board like to do there? In a weird way, we've covered that by approving the size. What I might say, not to necessarily point us to one gate or another, but if the concern would be the impact of the electronic sign, as I had discussed, perhaps we could put in some parameters of how the sign would be lit, such as its brightness, how often it can change, what is shown on the sign, and maybe even, there's a term for it, but the
Luminosity.
yeah, the luminosity and, the lighting of the characters versus the backlighting. There's a term for that. How those two go together. I do want to, if this would be okay, to ask staff, Bert, have we had conditions before where we've limited that luminosity of a sign? And if so, are you familiar with any language or any numbers on brightness of luminosity that maybe are in code or that we have used?
Yeah, I'll try to find the,
And I don't mean to put you on the spot
You're fine.
here unduly.
so if Tyler, you can hear me, if you want to transfer, move over to the document cam. There we go. So this is the city section of the city code that regulates electronic and multi-vision displays. And the brightness down here
Okay.
is where they're allowed on or on monument signs.
Okay.
These are the requirements that would come into play.
And you might have to help us a little bit. Illumination of 5,000
I don't know if
candles.
it says the brightness of any electronic display or multi-vision display may not exceed a maximum illumination of 5,000 candelas per square meter, which is nits, during daylight hours, and a maximum illumination of 250 candelas per square meter, which is nits, between dusk and dawn, as measured from the brightest element of the sign space.
And I'm not a candelas nits expert here, but I would assume that daylight versus night, that is many times more restrictive.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
that's correct.
Okay.
It's allowed to be brighter during the daylight.
Okay. And I think we've seen in the past, we have suggested that a sign can turn no more than X times on certain things. And, if you don't have anything handy, that's fine. But the minimum is what? No greater than every 8 seconds?
That's typically what we require is 8 seconds.
Right, the 5.7.4 standard that is in the middle of the right-hand
Yes,
column.
thank you, Judy.
Yep.
Yes, 8 seconds. I was looking for the number 8 and I didn't see it.
Right.
Okay. All right. I might try something here. I'm going to go ahead and put a motion out here. Now, Cindy, did you have a motion?
She had,
Yeah.
she made a motion.
Yeah, so you've made a motion. I'd like to second that, but with some friendly amendments. So you're okay with the size of the sign? Because we did kind of cover that. So I'd like to second that to allow for the electronic sign, but with some related conditions, if staff can help as need be to clarify that, to make sure it fits in. The lighting, the illumination shall be within the parameters of the candelas or nits for daytime or nighttime hours as listed in the code. I'd like to see that the any letters or words are the lighter color or the brighter color, and that background of the lit portion is the darker color, so it doesn't project as much. I don't know if I'm getting too artistic. You think that's fair to do that? Can you guys help us? The contrast, is that the word I'm looking for?
Contrast is fine.
Okay. Yeah.
Eric Lundy, zoning enforcement
Yeah,
officer. I just
help me
want you to
out.
make sure that you're of the understanding that you really can't be
Content now?
dictating content.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, I've got you. All
And
right.
that starts to get into it.
Yeah,
That's
all
when
right.
We're talking about.
Then I'm
color.
going to be careful there. I think everybody
I
understands what
think
I'd
if
be
you're
getting
going
at,
with a physical attribute.
but I don't want to
you're
get
fine.
there. Okay, all right. So I'll go ahead and scratch that part, but basically illumination has to be within existing code. But I'd like to put in, this is quid pro quo if this floats at all. Although the minimum is 8 seconds, I'd like to see that the signage doesn't occur on any one facade or combination of facades within 30 seconds. So I don't want it to change over here 30 seconds, but in an off 15 seconds, it's changing over there because the total amount of signage cannot change greater than every 30 seconds in any one regard. Does that make sense, colleagues? Okay. And I think trying to stay within some reason there, that would be it. So is that clear enough for the record, Judy?
Yes.
All right. So Cindy's motion, my second, with those two related conditions about illumination and sign changing. So we'll see what happens. Here.
Okay, and Cindy, you are, the amendments that were made, you're acceptable with those? Yes. As part,
Okay. Yep.
I want to get that.
Cindy's cool with me.
Okay,
All right.
good.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, so we're gonna. So we've got a motion and a second with conditions to grant a variance to allow for the electronic signage. So we'll take a vote on that to see what happens. So all those in favor of granting the variance with the requested conditions, raise your hand, say aye. 1, 2, 3. Those that would be opposed. 1, 2, 3. So by board procedure, that motion fails.
Correct.
It always takes 4 for approval. Now, because of that, since the motion to grant the variance fails, the board does not need to take any other action on that item. Is that correct? Okay, all right.
You guys are missing Dave.
Yes.
That's for the ESPN Sports after action analysis. Yeah. Okay, so that motion fails. So we've granted the conditional use permit request to allow for the operation, and we've granted the size of the signage, but in this case, we have not granted a variance to allow for the electronic sign. Okay, so that concludes that agenda item. We have minutes. Anybody present from the last meeting? Did you see any concerns in the minutes? If
Yeah.
you did not?
Item 3, it's got, I think it probably got copied from the previous one. It's got Lynn's in it, Lynn's name in it, and Mel's absent.
Okay.
Come on,
Which-
man. Good catch, dude.
And then the final vote on the minutes before, it has the right vote count, which is 501, but it doesn't have Mel marked as abstaining, which I think he did,
Okay.
because he was gone the previous one.
Yeah,
Yep, I see that.
good
Thank you.
catch.
And Mel was there.
Okay.
Yeah,
He
I was
voted.
at the hearing, but because I
Yeah.
didn't vote on that previous one, yeah.
I appreciate you pointing those out. Thank you.
All right, so, and we haven't done this for a while. So Nathan has proposed corrections to the record. Do we have to vote on that?
No.
No.
So
Motion-
with
Motion
Nathan's
has
corrections to the record, is there a motion to grant approval?
Yeah, I'll move with those corrections.
Okay, motion by Nathan, second.
I'll second.
Second by Marlis. All those in favor who were present at the last meeting, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion then carries by default 4-0. You can't vote on that one anyway. Yeah. So, okay, any other business?
Yes, I did want to introduce Frank Dunyoung. He's with us. I think I introduced him once on a virtual meeting, but we have him here today in the flesh. He's going to be transitioning to become the primary lead for Board of Adjustment.
That's
So he's
awesome.
still wrapping up his site plan review and plat review responsibilities. So
Cool.
I'm still helping out more than I will be in the future, but wanted to point out we have Frank here. And then
That's awesome.
behind him is Jimmy. He's one of our new zoning inspectors.
Oh, Jimmy, I'll look forward to working with you. Yeah.
So we're up to staff with 6,
Okay.
with some, concentrated effort on signs in the right of way,
Sure.
division, but
That's great.
we're going to take a focus on some of the issues.
So Jimmy's new to city employment? Nope. You've been here for a long time?
City Survey Department.
Survey.
Engineering for the last almost 16 years.
16 years, cool. And Frank, how long have you been with the city?
I've been with the city for 13 years.
Okay, all right. So you bring a lot of background to what you guys will be doing to help us out here. That's great. So, well, great. Appreciate the introductions. Anything else we need to do, Bert?
Just try not to mess up the minutes like Bert does.
I'll blame Catherine.
Okay, well,
I wanted to just thank everybody for coming today. I know
Yeah.
we were kind of back and forth on virtual or in person, but the governor's proclamation did expire on Sunday, so
okay.
we were kind of scrambling, but
Yeah. And while we met here this month, I do believe we will meet back at the Municipal
thank you.
Service Center next month, correct?
yeah. So
Okay.
if you haven't already validated your parking pass, please stop at the clerk's office on your way out of the building and get that validated.
Okay, all right.
All right,
This
thanks,
hearing
everybody.
is formally adjourned. Okay.